Hey, so I'm doing a little bit of listener feedback, and I'm wondering, Sam, what you think of the show?
Do I have to cut
back
a mic?
to
Hello, and welcome to the Grand Parade Podcast. I'm your host and City Hall reporter and editor of the Grand Parade newspaper. What a week it was last week in municipal politics, with 4 relatively major committee meetings all happening last week. We got a heritage property development approval. We got some slow-moving progress on police reform. There's a $2 million typo, and to round it out, at the end of the show, we're going to cover a spicy transportation standing committee meeting. But first, as always, a reminder that this podcast is in support of a newspaper, also called Grand Parade. This morning, Monday morning, issue 4 is on newsstands over at Atlantic News, with a feature story from Denny Sullivan, who makes the case for why Halifax should adopt congestion pricing. On Wednesday, this issue will be available in the Dart Gallery in Dartmouth. Are you the owner of a coffee shop or a small business with a waiting room? Do you want to support local journalism while providing your patrons an opportunity to engage with their municipal democracy? Well, shoot me an email to matt@grandparade.news to ask how you can become a distributor, which costs you 0 money, and in return, you get the opportunity to make a little bit more than 0 money. And, on an administrative note, I am not going to meet my publishing schedule. I know already I'm not going to meet my publishing schedule for issue number 6. Based on the travel schedule alone, I know I will not be able to get an issue of the newspaper onto newsstands on June 9th. There may be a podcast, but probably not. We shall see. And one more thing, surprise! This episode has a pop quiz. I hope you studied for it. If you get this quiz right, shoot me an email, also at matt@grandparade.news, and you will win a digital subscription to the Grand Parade newspaper. Do you already have a subscription to the paper? Well, then you will win a random book off my bookshelf. Will it be a history of U-boats during World War II? Will it be a Piers Anthony book? Will it be a random nonfiction book about the proliferation of the sin industry in Windsor, Ontario, from Confederation to now? Will it be Book 7 of Stephen Erickson's 3.5 million word fantasy epic, The Malazan Book of the Fallen? Get this question right, and you'll find out. Anyways, here's the pop quiz. During last Thursday's Transportation Standing Committee meeting, Councillor Sean Cleary said this about regulating taxes, about regulating taxis.
We don't regulate the price of pizza. I'm not sure why we regulate the price of a drive.
Here's the quiz. What, if anything, is wrong with Cleary's statement about Council's powers to regulate the price of pizza? Before coming back to that, we got a full week of meetings. First up, Tuesday, the Halifax and West Community Council met and approved a development for Tenkirk Road. This is now going to be some condos and a refurbished heritage building when it's done. Speaking of the property on Tenkirk Road, there is still a path on it, and council is still waiting for a staff report about that path and the city's ability to de facto expropriate land through zoning, thanks to the city's loss to the Annapolis Group at the Supreme Court back in 2022. On Wednesday, the Audit and Finance Standing Committee met for a relatively routine meeting. Dutch Village Road will now cost $11.9 million, up from $10 million approved in the budget earlier this year. I've heard reports that staff actually knew that this additional money was needed all along, and they even know where they think the money should come from, so it's not really a budget increase because the money was already committed. I sincerely hope that this is not true, because that would mean that with the Dutch Village Road typo and the armored pickup trucks from budget season, that's twice this year where city staff have pre-spent money without getting council's approval. So twice this year, councillors have been put in a position where they need to retroactively approve money that staff have already spent. This is not yet a serious issue and may not ever be a serious issue, but this is incredibly sloppy bureaucracy which can easily create fiscal and political vulnerabilities, aka issues, for council. So I'm watching closely to see if this becomes a trend. Even though chasing our green energy goals through hydrogen might be a bit of a pipe dream for our province, making Halifax Transit buses hydrogen diesel hybrid is incredibly cheap due to provincial speculation. The city is getting provincial money to retrofit buses to also be able to take hydrogen, which should reduce Halifax Transit's fuel costs while also reducing Halifax Transit's emissions. After the Wednesday morning meeting of the Audit and Finance Standing Committee, the Board of Police Commissioners met for a meeting that was painfully boring. The second second half of the meeting was dominated by some good but boring policy work on the HRP's extra duty policy, their holy crap, we and or the police screwed up and now we have to deal with it policy, and the armored personnel carrier policy. I would just like to point out that the day before the meeting, May 20th, the HRP bought their armored personnel carrier. On May 21st, the Board of Police Commissioners started the process of creating the policy for the armored personnel carrier's use. Now, I know the police in the city have gone to great lengths to rebrand this personal carrier as a rescue vehicle, but the fact remains that an armored box with gun ports can be used as a weapon, even if it's an armored personnel carrier and not an infantry fighting vehicle. The only thing that prevents the armored personnel carrier from being used as a weapon is the city's policies governing its use as set by the board. And even though the city's legal violence users, aka the police, now have a state-of-the-art potential weapon, the city does not yet have policies in place to protect Haligonians from this potential weapon being used as one. The Halifax Regional Police have started doing a case review process for sexual assault cases which don't result in a conviction. But instead of doing an independent automatic case review process, they're doing the RCMP's case review process, in which the HRP selects which cases they want to bring to the RCMP's case reviews. There are concerns that the way the RCMP does this review is not as good as the board's preferred case review process as first defined by then Commissioner Harry Critchley in his motion a few years ago. So as a result, Commissioner Tony Mancini started asking some hard questions about the case review process. Good news for Haligonians that Mancini is doing this, but the bad news is that the HRP have only started attending the RCMP's case review process a few months ago, so there's not really a lot of data one way or the other. I expect Mancini to follow up with this issue. All in all, it was not a bad meeting for the board, except for a few notable clangers mentioned already. The bulk of the first half of the meeting was taken up by Dr. Amy Siciliano, the HRM's top public safety policy wonk. She told the board that the city's success in police reform can be attributed to former Mayor Peter Kelly. Back in 2006, Kelly, or someone in the city's team, figured that a lot of the stuff that was required for police reform were upstream or strategic issues that weren't directly police related. But most of the city's public safety policy decision makers pre-2006 were the downstream tactical thinkers, like the police's rank and file trying to survive day to day, and councillors trying to survive to the next election. As a result, the upstream stuff, like the non-police emergency response team rolling out this year, didn't have anyone in the city researching, writing, and advocating for long-term strategic policies that would solve the day-to-day tactical issues of public safety. So in 2006, the city tried to fix this by creating and putting a public safety bureaucrat high in the city's organization, so that that person could start working on upstream public safety solutions. And now, 20 years later, all that upstream work is starting to have downstream impacts, like the non-police emergency response team. So here's something I never thought I'd say in my lifetime. Kudos to former Mayor Peter Kelly? Yeah, that's weird for me too. Anyways, we're about to transition to Thursday's Transportation Standing Committee, and by way of transition, I just want to mention one of the other things that came from the Board of Police Commissioners meeting on Wednesday. And that thing is a clear explanation of why the Department of Public Safety is achieving success in police reform, while the Department of Public Works is getting further and further away from zero preventable deaths on infrastructure the city builds. But to understand what I mean, first, here's a clip from Amy Siciliano, the HRM's public safety policy wonk, who absolutely dummies Director of Public Works Lucas Pitts in front of the Board Police Commissioners. Here's Siciliano.
Each action area has an outcome or a set of outcomes, and what that means is the change that we aim to make over time. We track activities within each of the action areas that are contributing to this change we aim to make. These activities are informed by a theory of change or a set of evidence-based assumptions about the relationship between the activities and the outcomes.
Or, in other words, here's how the Department of Public Safety does its policy making. First step, they identify a problem. Second step, they come up with a plan to solve that problem. Third step, they implement that plan. Fourth step, they track the data to see if the plan is working. Fifth step, they change the plan as needed based on the outcomes in the data. This is good policy making, and why we're seeing progress, if slow, on police reform, public safety, and defunding the police. For comparison, here's the head of the Department of Public Works, Lucas Pitts, explaining the new road safety strategy to the Transportation Standing Committee last year.
Through the chair, first one, We do have, as you may remember, we do have the per capita technically as the goal, but we have all the KPIs as well that have mostly absolute numbers in them, and that includes like vulnerable road users, the different types like cyclists and pedestrians. We're going to separate those out as absolute KPIs, and that will be publicly available information on our dashboard. On the improvements between this one and the old one, Personally, I think this one is vastly more succinct, more data-driven, and more outcome-driven.
Stop the clock and grab the whiteboard, because we are breaking this down. First off, when Pitt says,
as you may remember, we do have the per capita technically as the goal.
No. This is incorrect. This is not true. The road safety strategy was created because the city adopted Vision Zero. Remember Vision Zero? The goal of the road safety strategy, the desired outcome of the road safety strategy, is the same as Vision Zero. No deaths on HRM streets. The goal was never supposed to be a decline in per capita road deaths. The goal of the HRM's road safety strategy was, and still is, an absolute reduction in Haligonians' preventable deaths to zero. The per capita goal means that the outcomes on HRM streets are moving further and further away from Council's stated goal of no road deaths by 2030. If Public Works was actually working towards the goal of zero deaths, then when deaths went up in absolute terms, their policies or design standards or something would have changed to have an effect on the outcomes we're seeing on our streets. Instead, the per capita reporting metric means that the Department of Public Works can report a success on increasing road safety even as the amount of deaths go up. And the deaths going up is obviously further and further away from Council's desired outcome of zero. Which brings us back to the part of Pitt's statement where he says this.
Personally, I think this one is vastly more succinct, more data-driven, and more outcome-driven.
I'm calling bullshit. The data is in. The outcomes are in. Halifax's road safety strategy is not working. It is not eliminating road deaths in the HRM. Hell, even according to the HRM's own data, we've only seen a per capita reduction in road violence 2 out of the 5 years we've been tracking it. One was in 2020 when traffic volumes dropped like crazy, and one was in 2023 when the city saw less than a 1% per capita decrease in road violence from 2022. Now, to be fair to the Department of Public Works, COVID and the year 2020 were a massive shift in our societal norms, and politicians enacted and then struck huge COVID policies. As a result, our patterns of life, and therefore most of the world's data, were disrupted and have massive outliers in the year 2020. But the effects of policy are not instantaneous, and over the past 5 years, governments have started to settle into our new normal. What this means from a data point of view is that we don't know how long the outlier period for COVID actually is in the data. Various places like New Zealand and sectors like internet security have been crunching outlier numbers, and the general consensus seems to be that the COVID outlier in data is anywhere from 1 to 5 years. And now, thanks to other transportation data, like Halifax Transit's ridership data, I would suggest that in the realm of transportation, Halifax had an outlier period that lasted about 5 years. And if the outlier period for COVID was in fact 2020 to 2024, then in 2025, we should see an almost flawless continuation and surpassing of violence in the 2019 trends. And I'm sad to report that so far, Halifax's trajectory in road violence, specifically when it comes to deaths, is heading in that direction. Halifax's safest year on the roads in recent history came as a result of the 2020 lockdowns, which kept people at home and off the roads. Also, during COVID, working from home became popular and people moved here in droves, but then couldn't drive, which boosted our population numbers. This in turn means that 2020's per capita safety numbers were artificially boosted by COVID and provincial lockdown policies, not municipal transportation policies. Regardless of that, staff used 2020's outlier data to show a massive reduction in road violence from the baseline year of 2018, and gives the appearance that Public Works has been successful in making roads safer, even though the data says it's very possible that most of the departments of Public Works' success has been coincidental. This is supported by the fact that road deaths in Nova Scotia and Canada have recently come back with a vengeance. 2024 was Nova Scotia's deadliest year on the roads. 2022 was Canada's deadliest since 2013. But to rein this rant back in so we can talk about the last meeting of last week, the Transportation Standing Committee meeting of Thursday, what this analysis is supposed to show is that the Department of Public Safety is succeeding in police reform because they are writing policy and making choices to achieve council's desired outcomes. The Department of Public Works is failing at not killing Haligonians because they wait for the outcomes of their decision and then write policy to match those outcomes. On top of moving further and further away from the end goal of road safety, which is and has always been 0 deaths, the Department of Public Works change their reporting standard so they can now report success in road safety, which obfuscates the data, which is starting to say that more and more people are dying on our roads, moving farther away from council's desired outcome of none. It really makes me wonder what Halifax would look like if the folks in charge of public works were as competent in policy as the folks over in public safety. Well, more seniors will just have to die in crosswalks until political pressure mounts enough for us to find out how much better Halifax could be with a better Department of Public Works. Speaking of disappointing transportation policy, let's move to Thursday's Transportation Standing Committee meeting. One of the big reasons the Department of Public Works can get away with being so terrible at transportation planning is because some of our elected leaders have a terrible understanding of how the city works. At this meeting, the committee got an update on Halifax's quote-unquote AAA bike quote-unquote network, which is going to be about a decade delayed and about twice as expensive as the city first planned. This increase in costs makes absolute sense. If you put your groceries in a shopping cart in 2017 but then didn't buy them until 2025 or 2028, of course they'd be more expensive when you actually checked out 8 to 12 years later. The same is true for Halifax's bike network. This $45 million project is now going to be about $95 million and be mostly but not quite finished by 2028. Maybe. Councillor Trish Purdy weighed into this debate to show her ignorance on transportation planning when she said this.
I just feel obligated to speak for all the residents who are not in favor of the AAA bike network and the millions of dollars going into this. 66 million. I felt very sad reading this report because we are struggling with so many competing priorities in our municipality. We have, hundreds of thousands of people who will never get on a bike and go for a bike ride to work or to the store or to the local rec center. And we're spending 66 million in the next few years on bike lanes. And bike lanes are good and nice to have, but we have so many competing priorities. We need recreational infrastructure desperately for our residents. We need sidewalks desperately for our residents. We need transit upgrades and service enhancements, and we need road recapitalization projects. So this to me is a sad report, and it does not represent the needs of, I think, the majority of our residents in HRM. So I just wanted to say that, and I know this is an information report, so thank you.
And one of the most frustrating things about Councillor Purdy is that she is absolutely correct. Halifax has no money and can't spend money on its competing priorities because of our transportation infrastructure choices. Purdy has correctly identified that, like Germany in World War II, we are spending too much money on an impractical vanity project. In World War II, Germany, they were dumping money into Werner von Braun's V2 rockets at the expense of giving Erwin Rommel new Tiger tanks. But for more details on the politics of the V2 rocket, I'd recommend Cautionary Tales by Tim Harford. He does a 3-part series, or the book Rocket and the Reich by Michael Newfield. But the very short version is that Germany dumped a rocket load of money into the V2, which prevented them from investing in their other competing priorities, like winning World War II. This is not to say that Germany wouldn't have lost anyway, since most of their leadership was on meth most of the time, and invading Russia was like a terribly bad idea, but the V2 rocket is instructive for Halifax. Like the German political leaders of the era, Purdy refuses to acknowledge that the reason we don't have money for competing priorities is because of a massive budget line item that everyone just straight up pretends doesn't exist or is somehow untouchable. Like Germany, we can't solve our major problems because we're dumping all of our money into the vanity project of a man. Instead of von Braun's project of rockets, Halifax is going all in on Robert Moses's vanity project of roads, instead of things that will actually win us our war on congestion, like dedicated lanes of travel for anything that isn't a car. Bike lanes, bus lanes, rail lines, gondolas, literally anything other than roads for cars. But we don't have the money to invest in transportation infrastructure like bikes or buses or rails or gondolas because of the work on our car lanes. Car lanes cost us over $1 million per kilometer in annual maintenance cost. $1 million, by the way, is not enough to keep up with the maintenance burden. And recent projects like Robie Street widening and the Windsor Street Exchange shows us that automotive capital projects are well over $150 million per kilometer. Halifax's AAA bike network is $780,000 per kilometer. But it's not just the capital costs. It burns the city in other ways too. Due to the large amounts of space required for cars, large business parks are way less efficient at generating revenue for the city. Costco Dartmouth Crossing, all 15 acres of it, paid $6 million in property taxes last year. Park Lane Mall, the entire half of an acre, paid over $20 million in taxes. And part of Purdy's whole shtick is that she is the fiscal champion of the little guy. She's the one making sure that common folk and small businesses don't pay too much in taxes. But council's tax rates mean that the cell phone case kiosk guy in Park Lane Mall is paying way more in taxes of his Motorola razor-thin margins than Costco does of their $7.3 billion in profits last year. So every time Purdy advocates against bike and bus infrastructure, just know that she is also arguing for higher taxes for local downtown businesses to give the Costcos and Walmarts of the world a massive tax break. And that tax break, combined with the high cost of road infrastructure, is why Halifax can't fund its competing priorities. It makes sense that the Germans didn't understand their fiscal reality because they also didn't understand some pretty core tenets of biology, and they were doing a lot of meth. But it is less clear why Purdy, 5 years on the job, still doesn't understand this. But this brings us to the final motion we're going to talk about, the recommendation to increase taxi fees and look at deregulating the taxi industry. And this is where the Cleary clip for the pop quiz at the top of the show came from. He was pointing out that the American taxi brokers, like Uber, are absolutely crushing local taxi brokers like Casino in market share, and part of the problem was that local taxi fees were regulated by council and Uber fees were not. This allowed Uber to exploit a lack of regulation in the taxi industry, and they undercut local companies by underpaying their independent drivers rates as low as $10 an hour. So Cleary was wondering why council regulated the price of taxis to make local companies uncompetitive, because it doesn't regulate the price of pizza to make local companies less competitive. As a reminder, the pop quiz question is, what, if anything, is wrong with the statement that council doesn't regulate the price of pizza? Here's the clip again.
I'm not a huge fan of governments regulating prices of anything. And in fact, I've said this many times over the last several years, and I said it in the media just recently. We don't regulate the price of pizza. I'm not sure why we regulate the price of a drive.
And if you said regulating pizza prices is not only within council's powers, but it is explicitly something they are supposed to be using their powers to regulate, then congratulations, you would be correct. But like grade school long division, this is complicated, so I'm going to show you my work. As everyone knows, due to the lackluster civics education in Canada, a few people listening might know how the powers of each level of government break down. Massively abridged for people who got failed by their province, the federal government deals with stuff outside of our borders and things of national interest. The provinces are responsible for provincial stuff within their own borders. This is confusing in the modern day because some things of national interest, like healthcare, are a provincial responsibility. But please just remember that when Canada was dividing these powers and becoming a colonized country, it was at a time when the four humors theory of medicine was still the dominant theory of medicine. And at that time, healthcare made a lot of sense as a provincial responsibility. Anyways, Canadian cities first started becoming a formal entity in 1835 when the Municipal Corporations Act was passed by the British government. In 1849, the province of Canada, modern-day Quebec and Ontario, passed the Canadian version of the Municipal Corporations Act. Then, in 1867, when Canada became a country, provinces were given formal power to, quote, exclusively make laws in relation to end quote, their cities. In Nova Scotia, outside of things like policing, the main power given to the city is that of land use for city planning. Until very recently, with Tim Houston's Tories, provincial governments have traditionally been like, city planning? Ugh, no thanks, peasants. This is how and why cities have exclusive jurisdiction over the use of land with tools like zoning, land use bylaws, and transportation infrastructure and policy. How the land of this city is used for transportation is exclusively and explicitly a power of council. They're supposed to use their powers to ensure people and goods can move around this city freely, which is why the province, through Clause 305 of the Motor Vehicles Act, has given council the explicit power to regulate, quote, persons transporting for hire by means of any vehicle, passengers, or goods, like pizza, within the boundaries of said city, town, or municipality, except where such persons are public utilities as defined in the Public Utilities Act, or are motor carriers who are required to be licensed under the Motor Carrier Act, end quote. The pizza bit obviously is not in the regulation. But anyways, the good news for council is that Uber lobbied the province very hard not to be motor carriers, so they're not. They're regulated by council. So, can council regulate the price of pizza? They can, if it's delivered on an HRM street. But that's honestly not the most interesting question. The most interesting question is, should council regulate the price of a pizza being delivered on the HRM streets? It is within their powers, but is it within their jurisdiction? I would argue, yeah, it is. But it really depends on whether or not you see the charter right of, quote, freedom of mobility within Canada, end quote, as applying to you moving around your own city. Because council has the explicit power over transportation infrastructure in the municipal charter. And because the charter also gives council the power to run or regulate things like public transit or private for-hire last-mile logistics companies, and because the Motor Vehicle Act gives council the power to regulate the fees and licensing of those last-mile logistics companies like Casino Taxi and Uber Eats delivering a pizza, they are the ones with all the power they need to build a city that does not suffer from debilitating congestion, which also discriminates against transit riders and disabled people's freedom of movement. You know, some of that coveted freedom of mobility stuff within the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And there are enough studies now that we know that the Ubers and DoorDashes and Lyfts of the world, they cause congestion. They degrade our roads and they cause a massive amount of congestion. We know that these massive American companies make their profits by exploiting local labor. We know that these large American companies are making their profits by exploiting local restaurants. And you now know that your city council is the level of government with the jurisdiction and power to do something about this problem. They are the ones who can regulate against this exploitation of local companies for American corporate profits. So given the chance to stand up for Haligonians and local small businesses, you know, the stuff that progressives like Sean Cleary and fiscal champions of the little guy, Trish Purdy, should all be fighting for, listen up! It's a trade war and these American companies are exploiting us Haligonians for profits! Elbows up, lads. These American companies will fight back hard. But we've trained for this. We know what happened when David faced Goliath. We have faith in you, our champions. We know that you, our champions, will stand up to these Yankee wanky bullies in our darkest hour, in our hour of need. I know you are scared, but you are Halifax's champions. Elbows up, lads. We're going over the top!
Or go nuclear and just deregulate fares for taxis and limos.
I want to go for deregulation. Like, what are we doing? Just deregulate.
Jesus Christ. Well, we're running a bit long, and that'll do it for me today. It is Sunday afternoon. I gotta get to a D&D session where I am the DM. How is my party gonna survive a boat attack? I don't know. I haven't written this boat attack yet. I am in trouble. So I'm just gonna leave it here. As always, please go out and pick up a copy of the paper at Atlantic News today or anytime this week. Go pick it up at Dark Gallery in Dartmouth. Please follow me at Land of Sticks, wherever @signs are bought and sold for free, which is Blue Sky and Instagram. And as always, please find more of my reporting and other great stories about Halifax from local writers over at www.grandparade.news. All right, chaps, bye!